Hey guys, into the end here, I have a new deck for you today. It is this deck here I dubbed Explore the Ancients, and this is an interesting deck. This is a very expensive deck, so it's not for new players for sure, but it's a very fun, exciting ramp deck. So what a ramp deck is you basically devote half of your deck to things that give you more power, and then you use that power to cast really big things that will take over the game, and you're hoping to beat your opponent, not with tricky cards or in interactive cards or disruptive cards. You're actually just looking to beat your opponent by using brute force. You just throw piles and piles of stats at your opponent until they die, and you're just gonna brute force over anything they play with sheer power. These style of decks has always been very popular in Magic as well, typically in green, and it's slowly becoming a little bit more viable in Eternal because we are now given a lot more very powerful tools that does more than just being a vanilla large unit. Ramping into things like Sandstorm Titan isn't good enough. I mean, Sandstorm Titan is very good, and ramping into it is still very good. But if you're trying to play a ramp deck, what you really needed was things like that. This is the kind of card that makes ramp decks worth it. And this, Great Kiln Titan and Nova Quick Titan are the two cards that I think it's sort of opened the door to unit-based ramp decks. Before this set, ramp decks has always been spell-based with New Tomorrow and Eight of the Horu, etc. And now we have Temporal Distortion Control, which is also a bit of a ramp deck. But more of a control deck than a ramp deck. But because of these cards, you now have some extremely powerful late game to ramp into, and you don't feel so screwed over when you ramp into this on turn 5 and you play it, and your opponent goes, Annihilate. At the very least, this will draw your card back. Or if your opponent plays like a Steward of the Past, and you can't attack anymore. Your Heart of the Vault can't attack into the Steward. Your Sandstorm Titan can't really attack into the Steward. You trade, but that doesn't seem like a great value. Whereas now you have some very strong late game inevitability, I would say. All right, so let's go through some of the card choices. This deck has opted to go very light on removal spells. As you can see, the only real removal is Purify and Zenith Initiation, and not very many copies. And the reason for that is because ramp decks can't really afford to devote too many slots to things that is not ramp and not payoff. You want to maximize the number of ramp and payoff cards so that you have the highest chance of drawing the right combination of them in the right order. And what I mean by that is, if you drew this half of the deck, you lose for sure, because this half of the deck does nothing. If you drew only this half of the deck, you also lose because you're not gonna, play power every turn until you can play Great Kiln Titans and Heart of the Vault. That's too slow. You need both. You need both sides, and you need a good mix of them, and you need to draw them in the right order. You can't have all of this in your opening hand and then draw into your Trailmaker on turn 3 or turn 4. That's too slow of a ramp, and your opponent will destroy you on tempo. So, Purify and Zenith Initiation, because we're not actually that interested in killing your opponent's units with a torch, because a torch would be the obvious alternative to Purify. What we're actually interested in is actually just disabling your opponent's unit. We're not so much killing it, because we're pretty sure that we can kill their unit with our giant units. What we don't want to deal with is things with very powerful special abilities that doesn't have to engage in combat to win. Or things that have very powerful abilities that wins in combat, like Cerso, for example. We can't really deal with Cerso. None of our units can fight Cerso fair and square. Other units like flying units, if they're able to kill our 4 copies or our Sandstorm Titans that we have drawn that game, and they have a bunch of evasive threats, then we do lose the game. So this will also help us with that. Unblockable units, although that's not very common these days. Another good target for this is Travert. Tavert. It does require combat, but it is very large, and it can attack into a lot of our units and survive the hit. So unless we have multiple copies on the board, he can attack freely. And then getting a 9/1 Rune Hammer basically destroys everything we can play. Zenith Initiation is just another form of removal. It's kind of nice to be able to give your units the ability to attack without having to actually attack. So in the beginning of the game, you just play Seek Power, Power Stone, Wrangler, or Trailmaker. All of these cards provide you with power sources. Three of these provide you with ramp, increases you from on turn 3, gives you access to 4 power. And having 4 power means you can play Sandstorm Titan. But the really important thing is playing World Bearer Behemoth on turn 4. That's very strong on turn 4. A couple of attacks in, all of a sudden you can start to play Great Kiln Titans on turn 5 and 6. So that's your game plan. You ramp into these giant units here, and you just start attacking your opponent. 2 copies of Etchings and Moondial, because this deck floods out a lot, as you may expect from a deck that has basically half of its cards devoted to ramping. You're going to draw a lot of ramping cards late in the game where you no longer want them. So the Edgings and the Moondial gives you a outlet for using all the excess power that you have. And Diogo is really good in this deck because you can ultimate Diogo a lot. And once you're able to ultimate Diogo, these units with charge and double damage is absurd. Very few decks can come back once you have ultimated Diogo. So it's actually a pretty good inclusion. Also another card you can ramp into, but typically not what you want to play, even if you ramped into it because you don't want it to die. You kind of want to wait until you have 10 power or 12 power, so you can just play it and then ultimate it right away. And that's it. The deck is very simple. 1 copy of Novaquick Titan because you pretty much never want this card in your opening hand, and you can only play this late into the game anyway. And 1 copy of Excavate in case this somehow gets into your yard, or you play it and it dies for some strange reason. You can bring it back for a second use. But usually, though, Excavate is best on a Heart of the Vault once it's died, because then you can just play it on your turn, warp it back in, and then draw another card off of it. So it's a lot of card advantage there. 4 copies of Shattered Glass Mage, because there's a lot of attachments these days that you want to deal with, but also having this as a warp card gives you a way to use all your excess power later in the game. So it's basically quote-unquote drawing a card for free, which is quite good. So yeah, this deck is pretty simple. It's very linear. It's just play power, cast Giant Fatty, bash face. That's it. Not a lot of tricks to it. So the games themselves are also quite straightforward. This deck is really bad against fast and aggressive decks. It is king against other mid-range decks, and it's kind of mediocre to kind of average against control decks, depending on the control deck, I guess. It has a average matchup against Felon Control. It has a pretty decent matchup against the Justice-based control decks. And a decent matchup against, like, so for example, Temporal Control. It has, I think it beats almost all of the mid-range decks that tries to go big, because you go bigger. But it's a dog to any kind of aggro deck. But anyway, so let's jump into some games.